My name is Justin LeClue, and I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club. And today, we're talking about Arthur J. Bressan. And who is this, Will?
Arthur J. Bressan Jr. was one of the pioneers of queer cinema, at least in an American context. You know, there was once a popular perception, I think, that gay cinema history really began in the 80s and 90s with, you know, Gus Van Sant and Todd Haynes.
Oh, the classics like, cruising.
I don't know about that one.
Yeah.
But, you know, the history of marginalized groups is often written in the margins. And this is the case with Arthur J. Bressan Jr., a true pioneer.
But also a filmmaker that many believed may have been forgotten in the margins because a lot of his films were not widely available. He has not been written about very much, and it's only recently, thanks to places like Vinegar Syndrome and the amazing work by Elizabeth Purcell, that we've been able to discover his stuff. There is some amazing Blu-rays that have been released of his movies like Buddies, and also a double bill of Passing Strangers and Forbidden Letters, that finally you can see his work the way it was meant to be seen.
There's also an initiative called the Bressan Project, led by his sister, Ro Bressan, who has worked to restore some of the films. We were interested in talking about him because there's a new Blu-ray that just came out via a Vinegar Syndrome partner label called Altered Innocence that collects two of his early films, Passing Strangers and Forbidden Letters, and a beautifully restored double feature with a lot of extras.
But wait a minute, Will. These are pornos?
That is true. So Arthur J. Bressan's career is interesting because there are sort of two movies that are the likeliest candidates for canonization. Okay, there's in 1977, he made an important documentary about gay America called Gay USA. And in 1985, he wrote and directed a film called Buddies, which was the first American dramatic film about the AIDS crisis.
And if you looked at his Letterboxd a couple of years ago, you'd assume, well, these are clearly the only two films that he's ever made other than the shorts, but that's because the rest of his career was done in gay pornography.
Yes, they are gay erotic films, but they're also political films, and there's a very coherent worldview. There are recurring stylistic motifs in both his mainstream and his pornographic films. They're all of a piece, essentially.
And they're also very good. I think that's very important, because when we gave that whole intro, you'd assume that then we would couch it in, well, you know, you have to consider he was the first, so he was discovering this stuff, and no, throw all of that out, because these movies are just great. They're some of the best pornos, period, as far as their intended goals and their execution.
Oh yeah, I mean, I wanted to explore him more because I watched Passing Strangers a couple weeks ago, not for the podcast, just out of curiosity, and I was just kind of blown away by how good it was. And I should just say, you can do a lot better on this subject than us. The new Blu-ray has audio commentaries by Elizabeth Purcell, and honestly, they're just dense with information. Also, her podcast, Ask Anybody, has done a number of episodes on Bressan's films as well as other gay pornography. They just did one on his film Daddy Dearest.
So consider us a tiny little stepladder that will hopefully lead you to more stuff if you don't already have any circles that those doors are present for you.
That's right. We're discovering this stuff with you. Mm-hmm. But you're right, the films are very interesting, and you know, there are certain authorial signatures that you can see, at least in all four of the movies that I watched for this podcast. He's interested in film within a film structures. He's interested in the making of movies themselves. Often in his gay porn films, there will be a scene where people are in a seedy movie theater watching like a mediocre gay porn film, as if to say to the audience, okay, this is what you normally get, and the rest of the movie is going to be a whole lot different and better.
Well, we can start with his first porn film, Passing Strangers, and jump around a little bit. Passing Strangers was released in 1974. It was his first feature film. He had made a documentary previously called Coming Out. And Passing Strangers, Bressan went in with like very definitive goals in his mind. That he had watched a lot of gay pornography before making his own, something that he admitted he wasn't that familiar with, and he picked up all of these traits, like the fact that oftentimes they're based on power, that there's very little story to them or attachment to the characters on screen, and he wanted to do something different. And his influences are directly from his love of movies, because he was a big movie guy. He actually interviewed Frank Capra, who was one of his favorites, and according to some special features on the Blu-ray, he even had a correspondence with Capra and talked about the movie Passing Strangers. And Capra said, listen, if it is based in a real love story, I can see that it has some value there, because Capra was not a very left-leaning guy, if you will.
Well, I think he also added that, listen, I'm against pornography, I'm against homosexuality. However, if it's a film about love and tenderness, it sounds
good.
It sounds a bit like It Happened One Night, as a matter of fact.
People reading letters, people writing letters is the structure to the majority of Bressan's films.
I'd also say that most of the movies that I saw, at least, are structured around kind of a dialectic. There's often a conversation. There are often characters who represent different generations, different points of view. And, you know, in Buddies, which we'll get to later, like there's a big generational divide between one of the characters who's an early gay liberation guy and another character who is a mid-'80s younger gay yuppie and more of an assimilationist. And Bressan, I think, clearly identifies more with the early gay lib guy, but the movies are interesting because it's hard being gay in America in the late 70s and early 80s. There are no villains in these movies exactly, except for the looming specter of Anita Bryant. So he can see the points of view of all of these characters, and he's interested in these political conversations. He considers them conversations.
Even in Passing Stranger, he very smartly structures the film, which is about a young 18-year-old man replying to a letter that he finds in a magazine and starting a relationship with an older gay man. He allows the guy who wrote the letter in the magazine to have a conversation with a friend of his who's a projectionist to allow humanity to come out of this. So like the older man isn't a mysterious or threatening figure, that there's a other side of him that's revealed while you're seeing all of these people kind of get together in this relationship.
Passing Strangers is set in San Francisco. It does tell this love story between an 18-year-old high school student who's sort of looking to break into gay life in the big city, and a 28-year-old veteran, you know, somebody who is well used to cruising the bathhouses and adult movie theaters and Polk Street and all the other spots. They meet through the personal ads, and the first half, where they're communicating only through letters, is in black and white. But in the second half, which starts with them having this erotic rendezvous in the park, it's finally in full glorious color. And then a lot of the second half is devoted to documentary footage of, I think, the first... I wasn't called Gay Pride Parade then.
Gay Day?
Yeah, the first Gay Day Parade. And this is another motif that runs throughout a lot of his movies. The boundaries between documentary and fiction are quite porous in these films.
Also, the second half is very much dedicated to sex, and lots of it.
There is a lot of fucking and or sucking in the movie, often quite artfully photographed, I would say.
Literally on rocks with crashing waves.
Yeah, and something about his camera makes it look more comfortable than it probably was.
Mm-hmm. Especially when you're outside under those trees. Looks like a beautiful sight, but woo, what a stressful thing was probably to shoot and just to roll around in that grass.
But anyway, you see a lot of the actual sites, you see a lot of historic events from the time, and it's just another example of how the history of a group like this is often told in a movie like this. I mean, this movie, I don't know what its reception was in the gay press at the time. I mean, probably positive, I don't know. But as a porn film, I think, you know, most porn films were just basically treated as garbage. Most porn films, especially gay porn films, the negatives were just thrown out. And if they exist at all, they exist in like VHS dupes.
And I think that what's important about this film is it's a very romantic one as well. I was trying to think about it. Are there many even straight porns that are like romantic?
You know, not quite to this extent. I mean, the Wakefield Pool movies have certain moments of tenderness in them. I know that when Wakefield Pool made Boys in the Sand, he did it sort of in a response to the early gay porn film that he thought was so ugly and degrading. But this one is very tender and sweet.
Yeah, you get the kind of wants and needs behind both of these characters. The young man who is looking for a relationship, he's played by someone that Bressan just met outside and formed a kind of actor-director relationship with. And there's a kind of innocence there. And when you see him like looking in the mirror because he has to take a photo of himself and send it to the guy, you see him like picturing himself like as a clown, as an ugly person. And finally he gets the courage up by imagining himself masturbating in front of a group of people that just applaud after he finishes, which is just a kind of imagination, even like Fellini-esque, if you will, of this movie and most of Brennan's filmography.
Now, Gay USA from 1977 is this ambitious documentary that chronicles gay Freedom Day marches that took place in, I think, 6 American cities. And it emerged in a specific context. In June 1977, California had just announced this ballot initiative, the Briggs Initiative, which would overturn a lot of gay rights in the state. Meanwhile, Anita Bryant, the great villain of the gay community at this time, famous singer who basically devoted her life at this point to being an anti-gay activist.
I cannot believe she's still alive.
She's still alive. I can't believe it. I mean, you never hear from her anymore. I think she's basically kind of...
living in a cave. She went bankrupt twice. Probably nobody wants anything to do with her.
I think she used to have like big endorsement deals that after a while...
Well, she used to be an orange juice model, I believe. And it got pulled away when she got really involved in her anti-gay crusade.
And in addition, the other big event was a couple of days before the parades, there was a gay man named Robert Hillsborough who had been fatally beaten in San Francisco. It was this very horrific hate crime that was major news at the time. So this event... or these events were happening in this shadow. And I think you can see in this documentary, it's quite a joyous movie. There's a lot of good feeling in it, but there are always, moments of tension or just strange like feelings happening on the edges of it that are there too.
But I think what's important about this movie is that it is joyous and it's spread across hundreds of people that you see in this movie, whether it just be faces that are passing in the crowd or people that answer the interviewers' questions, talking about how they came out, how it was important for them, why they're here, and just so many faces and stories that resonate even today hearing all this stuff. And you can imagine in 1977, like a lot of people had never seen this many gay people on screen. So this documentary is not just seminal, but it's also very impactful then and now.
Well, it's interesting seeing this documentary just in the current context, because now if you see a gay pride parade, there are all these corporate logos. There are like, the cops are sometimes in them, various conservative institutions are in there, probably if you've got a conservative mayor, he's probably in the parade too. But here, like the parades are very messy and they're big and they don't have beautiful floats or anything. It's just hundreds and hundreds of people in the streets. Yeah, you hear a lot of stories in this documentary of people realizing they were gay or feeling for the very first time that they didn't feel like an outcast in society. They're surrounded by people, gay people, as well as a lot of straight liberals who are there to sort of show that they're straight but not narrow, that kind of thing. But there are also quite a few debates that happen throughout the movie. There's an interesting section on the use of drag. You hear from one lesbian woman who says that she really hates the use of drag because she's like, oh, this is gay male privilege. They can affect the signifiers of female oppression. They can wear these clothes that are used to oppress us, and then they can discard it at the end of the day. And then you hear from a drag queen who says, no, that's not how I feel about it at all. I feel this is just an expression of my sexuality.
I'm glad we've gotten past all that. And
it's different now just in the sense that there's just been so much discourse on transness and gender fluidity that's not present in this documentary. It's an interesting moment in time, and we're watching this documentary, you and I are watching it in this current moment where this new, very vociferous anti-LGBTQ backlash that's happening, like you're hearing just so much about so-called grooming, so much repressive legislation, particularly in the red states, but, all over. A lot of the stuff that you're seeing in this documentary is happening just again, but in a different, slightly different guise.
Yeah, it's like it never really went away and it's coming back now.
That's why I was quite moved by the section in this documentary where it's talking about how the Nazis persecuted gay people.
And that it doesn't really get discussed that much, the fact that they used to put pink triangles on them.
I saw somebody tweeting today, I wish I could remember who posted this, but they said something like, okay, what happens if trans people lose the trans debate? And I mean, it's a good question. Like, we know what happens if trans people lose the trans debate.
Yeah, if only there was some kind of poem that led us down the path, but I don't think anything like that has ever been written.
Anyway, Gay USA, a very moving film, and
recently remastered as well.
You can find a beautiful version. You can rent it on Vimeo. And I mean, there's footage in this documentary from Triumph of the Will. I think the two movies, this movie and Triumph of the Will, they're kind of similar in certain ways, just in terms of the ways they were made. And I could imagine Bressan almost thinking this movie was a rejoinder to Triumph of the Will, because Triumph of the Will is like rigid lockstep formations, but this movie is just this kind of joyous,
messy, all over the place,
bursts, all sorts of opinions and points of view. And I like this movie better.
Yeah, wow, shocking opinion from Will Sloan.
What an iconoclast, sticking it to Leni Riefenstahl in 2022.
Gay USA is not a film that gets discussed that much, even today, even as seminal as it is. So hopefully that's changing now that there's like a remastered version, while Triumph of the Will is still kind of like dredged out and shown in university classrooms.
It's just like Triumph of the Will is just like this immovable part of the canon at this point. It's just this rock in the middle of the canon. And
Birth of the Nation, Triumph of the Will.
What are we going to do about it? I don't know.
So moving on, the next film that Bressan was able to complete was Forbidden Letters in 1979. And this was a long process. It took him, some people estimate, about 4 years to get it done before it came out. And when you look at it, you go, oh, yeah, that makes sense. This is not a porno that was shot in like 6 days.
I was interested to learn that in 1974 and 1975, he had started making a heterosexual porn comedy called Inside Norma Garland. And what was this movie supposed to be?
Well, it was supposed to be like a kind of like behind the scenes look at the porno industry with one of the actors in Forbidden Letters. And there's not that much information. Elizabeth talks about it on the commentary for Forbidden Letters. It seems that a lot of it was shot and it just never got completed. And Bressan was working on the film like up until he passed away, still writing new scenes for it.
It would have been curious to see what does a heterosexual movie by Arthur J. Bressan Jr. look like. I don't know.
Well, Bressan said that he always wanted to make straight films. Like, he wanted to be a Frank Capra-like figure.
Or a George Cukor or someone like that.
And even in this movie that never got made, he would have a flashback with gay elements in it, so it would always be part of his DNA. But unfortunately, like, the funding couldn't come through. He couldn't get it made. So he went back to completing this porno, Forbidden Letters, which, again, came out in 1979. And like Passing Strangers, it is about a relationship that is covered through letter writing. But in this case, it's about a relationship of a man that's in prison and the lover that he has who isn't sure what it's going to be like when this guy gets out of prison.
So yeah, it's structured through these letters that he's afraid to send to the guy in prison, because if the guy in prison is outed as being gay.
And this is based on something that happened to Bressan, which he sent letters to someone who had advertised in one of the magazines, and one of them was taken away and marked with, oh, this is seemingly meant for the woman's prison, right? Based on the language that you're using in this. And he got scared and he just stopped writing letters to the prisoner.
It's hard enough for anyone in prison, but then if they're outed as gay, I mean, just think of the multitude of issues that could cause, not least just with the parole board. So, it's almost like this, I mean, not officially, but effectively state-sanctioned closeting of a person.
And if Passing Strangers is a joyous gay porno, Forbidden Letters is a kind of nervous gay porno.
It's bittersweet. It's got a lot of melancholy, a lot of sadness. In the commentary, Elizabeth Purcell and Caden Mark Gardner talk a lot about how, like, during the long gestation, during the long filming process for this movie, everything that I mentioned earlier, the Briggs Initiative, Anita Bryant, the killing of Robert Hillsborough happened, during the production of this movie, and it almost kind of tinted the film, it added this melancholy air to it.
And I think they also discussed that if he had been able to complete it earlier or done some other scripts that he had written, it would have also been an angrier film, but it's more melancholic because it took so long to actually get out into the world. And even when it was completed, they couldn't even get it to play anywhere because distributors would say, oh, there's too much black and white footage in this movie because most of the present is shot in black and white, and they wanted, more sex scenes. They didn't want this kind of like narrative narrative that sex scenes would be involved in.
Well, the movie's 75 minutes long on the Blu-ray, and the recent Blu-ray is the first time that the uncut version's actually been released on home video, because when it was originally released on video, Bressan cut 15 minutes out of it to make it easier to sell. Cut out a lot of the poetry of it, obviously, to make it look like it had more sex.
Yeah, you actually don't even learn why the man in prison, played by Richard Holt Locke, who was a big gay porn actor that actually used his real name. We didn't even talk about this, that like Bressan didn't take a pseudonym on these films because he was proud of what he was doing.
Quite unusual in that regard. He regarded all of these films as personal films.
So Forbidden Letters is, again, just a beautiful film that is almost Bergman-esque at times. There's like one sex scene early on that's shot almost all in silhouette in like just gorgeous black and white up against a wall.
This is another motif that he likes. He likes cocks in silhouette. And folks, who doesn't?
And he also likes the perception of the viewer and either their imagination or movies. There's a scene where the young man is watching a gay porno, and then it cuts to him watching it like as if he was there on set as it was happening. But it's not an erotic thing. It's more of a distancing thing because he is just stone-faced as it's happening.
By the way, actually shot on Alcatraz.
Mm-hmm. They got permission from the National Parks organization that was running it, and they said they just had people that made sure that whoever was administrating the prison that day, there were no nude people when they came around. But yeah, there's a lot of masturbating that's happening in actual Alcatraz in the movie.
And apparently it was filming around the same time as Clint Eastwood and Don Siegel's Escape from Alcatraz.
Clint Eastwood could have walked into with somebody just, jerking off.
So, it just goes to show you how deep and multifaceted film history is. Clint Eastwood's shooting a movie, and then just on the other side of the lot,
someone's shooting a load.
Yep.
So Forbidden Letters, as we mentioned, was very difficult for Bressan to distribute. So his next film, Abuse, which came out in 1983, it wasn't a gay porno, but it was a very difficult subject matter dealing with child abuse, and a documentarian who kind of gets involved in this kid's life, a 14-year-old, and starts making a documentary about his abuse, but also starts having a relationship with the kid, which is very problematic, and the film is very aware about that as well. And it was another film that it's just difficult to distribute, that like he couldn't get anyone to carry it, especially it was also shot in black and white.
Good movie? You liked it?
Yeah, it's a great movie.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's unavailable other than like a really fuzzy VHS copy. Another one that definitely needs to be saved by a company, hopefully, and put it out there on Blu-rays like they did with his last feature film, Buddies.
So after Abuse, he made a number of adult erotic films, Daddy Dearest, Juice, Pleasure Beach. I know those movies don't have quite the same reputation as the earlier ones, although, as I understand, they are still auteurist works. Nevertheless, I would like to see those movies at some point. But Buddies in 1985, yeah, this is his last movie. As we said earlier, it's the first American dramatic film about the AIDS crisis. I learned from the Blu-ray extras that it was made very quickly. It was shot in May, it was edited in July, and then it premiered in September, almost as this burst of energy and creativity. It's a two-hander. It's set mostly at a New York hospital where a character named Robert, played by Jeff Edholm, is dying painfully of AIDS. And the hospital has a buddy program where AIDS patients who have no contact with friends or family are assigned a volunteer to talk to them and keep them company.
And what you get is a conflict between this young man, played by David Shader, and this patient that's just dying in the bed. Like, he's sick from frame one. We see him there. He's alone. And this person he doesn't know comes and he just wants to help him because he's been typesetting a book on the AIDS epidemic. And he feels that this is something that he could, help with. He's coming from a positive place, but at the same time, like all of Bressan's other films, there is journal entries that are being done by the young man. And he says right at the beginning, he doesn't even know if he's doing it for the patient or he's doing it for himself.
David, the younger man, who's 25, wants to assimilate. When they're watching a pride parade together on TV, David feels that the gay label alienates him from the rest of the world, whereas Robert, who's 32, feels that pride is a moment where the world actually lets him feel like he belongs. And as you mentioned, David is editing this book, something like The AIDS Reader, and it's collecting essays from all points of view. And that includes people who are religious fundamentalists, people who think that AIDS is God's retribution on gay people for their hideous behavior. And, Bressan, I think, is clearly on Robert's side in these debates. And the movie ends in such a way as to confirm that. But the movie wouldn't be interesting if David was just this straw man assimilationist, you know? It's like
he's in a long-term monogamous relationship. He's comfortable, lives in a gigantic apartment. Well, you can tell that Robert, he has suffered in life. And boy, this movie is just great, though. It is so
moving.
Good.
So profoundly moving. And, it's important to look at this movie in the context of 1985, where there's this epidemic that is
being ignored?
Well, yeah, it's just doing a genocide on an entire community, and the president of the United States won't even say the word AIDS. The president's best friend, Rock Hudson, is dying of AIDS, and they won't even acknowledge Rock Hudson. That's what they're up against. You look at it from the David character's perspective, it's like, okay, if this is the horrible world that I'm in, what do I have to gain from being visibly gay?
What can I do to change things? It's basically something that he says at one point.
Yeah, and then it ends on this, I don't want to spoil the ending, but it ends on this very profound and moving note. And the way that the movie is structured, it's this series of conversations, but it's structured around the Robert character's disintegration. When the inevitable happens, it's both, incredibly powerful, incredibly sad, and then you're also kind of like, oh, well, of course.
It had to happen eventually.
I don't know, it's odd. You spend the whole movie kind of hoping that somehow it's not going to happen, but then it does.
I mean, the film is just draped in sadness as well when you consider that the actor who plays Robert passed away from AIDS, as well as the writer-director, Bressan himself.
That's right. Bressan died in 1987, and there are all these wonderful initiatives happening right now, like the Bressan Project, and I really would encourage people to go on the Vinegar Syndrome website and get this new double feature of Forbidden Letters and Passing Strangers, as well as to try to find buddies if you can, because the restoration initiatives, they cost money,
and they can only continue to be done if people buy these Blu-rays.
And yeah, it's just really important that pieces of film history like this, stuff that who's going to save this stuff? What institutions are going to save this unless we support it,
I mean, it comes down to individuals like Elizabeth, who was definitely pushing this.
Oh yeah.
And it came out, and I think it's probably one of the best Blu-rays of the year. It's filled with short films, interviews with one of the actors, this is great stuff.
It's like a man's career in a box, you know?
So definitely check that. Next Vinegar Syndrome sale, you're like, what should I buy? Get that. Or just get it now. Don't wait for a sale. So as per usual, you can send us letters at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. And our first letter is from Wendell Parker. He goes, hey guys, long-time listener, first-time caller here. I wanted to write in to thank both of you for your idiosyncratic perspective you bring to the online film sphere. Outside of certain professional film critics, no other cinema commentators have proven themselves to possess your level of insight into the history of esoteric genre and art house fare. For the past 8 months, you have made my drab overnight retail job tolerable. And I give your show credit for reigniting my passion for film after a long bout of depression. Well, I'm glad we were able to help you out with that.
That's very sweet. Thank you.
Not to make things too personal, but Will, as someone who has recently lost both of their parents at the age of 21, I wanted to personally thank you for sharing your feelings of your own tragic loss, which I believe you did on the Michael and Us podcast.
I did, yeah. Thanks so much. I really do appreciate that, and I'm so sorry for your loss as well.
They have helped me better process the tumultuous despair I have been dealing with, and through your own musings on Ozu and Bergman, I have found a cathartic solace in their works during this time.
Well, thanks so much. That means a great deal.
On a lighter note, are either of you familiar with William Cameron Menzies? I think it would make a great episode because he arguably had one of the most impressive careers in all of early Hollywood, while still being a relatively obscure figure. Despite his huge success in production design and art direction, I'm mainly interested to hear both of your thoughts on his directorial work, especially his late career film Invaders from Mars. Amongst all of the pulpy 50 sci-fi films, that one particularly seems to have fallen out of popular consciousness, which is a shame because I personally think its hypnotic tone and surrealist imagery made it one of the best and ripe for rediscovery. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Anyway, thanks for the hours of entertainment, and I look forward to seeing what topics you'll cover next. I know that Invaders from Mars is a famous public domain film.
It's not a public domain film.
I thought it was.
It's owned by the dreaded Wade Williams.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
So, yeah, I have seen Invaders from Mars, although I only saw it once and it was not recently. I mean, I definitely like it. It's a beautiful beautiful film. It's just got like ripe, bursting color. I don't think I saw it at the right age, though, because
You weren't scarred by it, which a lot of people talk about.
yeah, like if you saw a lot of boomers saw Invaders from Mars when they were kids, and yeah, it stuck with them forever. And I just saw it when I was in my 20s, and it was just another movie that I saw. But, William Cameron Menzies,
Gone with the Wind. He's the one that's behind most of that.
I mean, I know that he's much more celebrated as an art director than as a director, but Things to Come is obviously like kind of a classic of the genre. I like that movie. Yeah,
There's stuff to talk about there.
Chandu the Magician with Bela Lugosi. I like that one too.
Seen that one.
Yeah.
That's someone I would like to tackle, even though that, like, when I do an art director like that, I almost want to talk only about his art directing, if we can approach it from that angle. An update on the director of Gorgo. I was recently at the library and found a biography that he wrote, Eugene Lourier, and I was disgusted to see there was no chapter on Gorgo.
Oh my God, there's a whole chapter about his work on Chaplin's Limelight, but not on Gorgo. And he did The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and a couple of other things, but I mean, he was the art director on Rules of the Game.
Yeah,
I mean,
so he probably wants to write that above, like...
I'd probably be prouder of that than Gorgo. I don't know.
This Godzilla ripoff that I did for a British company. Well, thank you very much for the letter.
William Cameron Menzies, I like the idea. We should put it on the list.
And the next letter is from Jacob Vassar, and he goes, "Hey, Will and Justin. I'm a relatively new listener to the podcast, and like others have pointed out in their letters, I'm actually relieved it's left me unable to take other movies' podcasts seriously."
That's right. Take that, Film Spotting.
Are they still around?
Probably. I don't know.
You've broken the curse, and for that feat, you get the Patreon money I was previously giving to a podcast hosted by Woody Allen collaborator redacted, so go nuts.
Woody Allen collaborator.
Who could that be? I don't know. I have a question, and hopefully it's not too personal, about your viewing habits with your partners. Since your tastes tend towards some particularly uninviting subgenres, do you try to keep a healthy wall between the movies you watch by yourself and movies you watch together? Or do you regularly invite your partners into the disgusting world of cinematic depravity that you've charted and navigated to the benefit of other sickos on the internet? Hey, come on, man. We watch arty films now, too.
Well, I mean, she didn't watch any Arthur Bressan Jr. movies with me. If that's
I will say that Emily walked into the room when I was watching Forbidden Letters, and she's like, "Are you watching a porno?" And I'm like, "Yeah, gay porno." She's like, "All right."
I've had various interactions like that as well.
Like, it's not a thing where I'm like, "Oh my God, I gotta hide it. She can't see it." So that would be a bad relationship if I had to do that.
Yeah.
But the letter continues. Are there a few subgenres that you know you both like and will be safe bets? You don't have to go into specifics if you don't want to reveal too much about your personal lives. I've always just been curious about how people who are professional movie watchers get that on a business card. No, that's so sad.
Professional movie watcher.
I would prefer, like, I don't know, critic, filmmaker. That'd be nice. Watch them together with their loved ones. Thanks so much for doing the podcast. Signed, guy who was formulating a plan to introduce his partner to the works of Jess Franco, Jacob. All right, Jacob. You know your partner better than me and Will. You will know if they would like Jess Franco or not. I think that's a pretty safe bet, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know what your partner likes, Will. I have a general idea as well.
I'm just going to tell you right now.
I'm not showing her Jess Franco.
She's never seen a Jess Franco movie.
She would not enjoy a Jess Franco
She never
movie.
will see a Jess Franco movie.
Yeah, like...
a male gazy horror stuff from the 70s is not her bag.
I know that when me and Emily watch movies, I usually pick ones that I'm like, I have a pretty good idea she would like this. For example, we watched Voyage of the Rock Aliens recently, an 80s, pop musical that is very similar to one of her favorite films, Earth Girls Are Easy. It's like, yeah, that's an easy choice. Like, I can make educated decisions of what my partner, things that I would recommend she would like or not.
Yeah, my girlfriend and I probably, our biggest overlap of interest is like old Hollywood. We watch a lot of classic, 30s and 40s movies together, as well as, just whatever new garbage is on Netflix as well,
that we're legally obligated to watch.
Classic relationship stuff, yeah.
It's like, what's The Rock in? I guess Red Notice. We'll watch this, right?
I watched 20 minutes of Red Notice, and I think she kind of had it on while she was doing some work, and 20 minutes was fine.
Probably enough. That's right. I mean, you shouldn't try to put your loved ones in a box. Like, if they show interest in something, you could be like, oh yeah, maybe you will like this, because people constantly evolving, constantly liking new things. But it has happened to me in my life where family members have been like, oh, what are you doing? And I go, I'm gonna go watch this movie, and they're like, oh, let's watch it together. And I'm like, you're not gonna like this. They're like, no, come on, I like this. Guess what? They don't like it, because you probably know people that are close to you pretty well.
That said, I do think it's good and okay to sometimes like introduce your partner to something that means a lot to you, and to sort of be like, I want to share this. I want to show this thing that means a lot to me, and I just need you to take one for the team.
Yeah,
let's
buckle up and watch Emmanuel
in America. Emmanuel in America. No, I wouldn't show that movie to my closest friends, except you, obviously.
Yeah, that's right. We watch it together.
There's
high five it throughout.
There's literally nothing I can't bring up on this podcast.
All right, so hopefully that's a little bit of guidance there, and don't be insulted if they don't like it. That's fine. Like, if you have someone that's exactly like you in a relationship, oh boy, they will probably murder you in their sleep. So if you want to send us letters, you can continue doing it at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. What are we doing on our Patreon this week, Will?
Well, it's the summer, and I know that because it's
so fucking
hot in here. Oh my God, I'm sweating. But anyway, we are going to be talking about the summer movie season. Not this summer movie season, but summer movies in general. The ideal summer movie.
We're going to discuss our favorites, what makes the perfect summer movie, and you can listen to this by checking out at patreon.com/theimportantcinemaclub.
Big screen, big sound, loved it.
Yeah, the movies, they're back. So, what are we doing next week, Will?
Well, it's definitely not sellout month anymore, because we are going to be talking about one of America's greatest currently active experimental filmmakers, but a fun one. California's own Damon Packard.
Damon Packard? Wait, the guy who did the untitled Star Wars documentary and Reflections of Evil? One of the weirdest movies you will ever see?
He also did Fatal Pulse and lots of other movies that have not been, and I don't think even can be, distributed legally.
Yes, that's right. I believe AGFA, you can rent a DCP of Reflections of Evil from them.
But you should check out, folks, go on Vimeo or wherever it is and watch Untitled Star Wars Mockumentary.
Oh, so good.
It's under an hour long. He basically built it out of the behind-the-scenes footage from The Phantom Menace and added a lot of other stuff. There are quite shocking moments in it. There are pornographic moments, so just prepare yourself. There's some ugliness in the film, but it is incredibly funny.
We talk about cinephile directors a lot on this podcast, and Damon Packard is one of those. If it was just like a faucet that you turned on with no control and it just splattered all over the screen.
And, his movie Fatal Pulse, which we're not going to talk about next week, but it's one of his more recent ones. Imagine like Inland Empire meets Tim and Eric's $1 billion movie. Like Julia Roberts is a character, William Friedkin is a character.
William Friedkin is a major character in the film. Yeah. We discussed it many years ago when we played it at the What the Film Festival.
Yeah, I mean, I was so glad to have seen it at the What the Film Festival, because that movie is like 2.5 hours long. Like, it's so great. It's so good. And there were times in it where I was like, I can't take this anymore.
I'm going to die.
Yeah.
It's also a movie, you watch it in such a grand, big cinema like the Royal. You're like, this should not be here.
Oh, my God.
It feels wrong. So that's what we're going to be doing next week. And until then, my name's Justin LeClue.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening. We are so close to getting 600 Patreon subscribers. Only 5 away as this recording. If you're not a Patreon subscriber yet, don't you want to be one of the last 5? Come on, subscribe at patreon.com/theimportantcinemaclub. We're going to have a special only these 600 people that hit, or if we get over 600, anybody that gets in there before we hit episode 300, that no one else will get. So make sure to become a Patreon subscriber now. And I would like to thank some of the new ones who just joined, who include Colin Erner, Taylor Marchand, Kevin Vinny, Jack Davenport, Norm Munoz, Bradley Meek, Alex Katz, Michael Larson, Luke Lafferty, Greg McDonald, Benjamin Woodard, Tarek Mahbub, Joseph Lorenzo, Stephen Rice, Brennan French, Caleb Clements, Tom Taylor, Toss West, Christopher Doubles, Philip Cozy, Robert Riot, Philip Jeffries, Patty Delaney, Joshua Barnes, Ian Walmark, Kyle, and Ned Grade. Thank you very much for becoming patrons. We could not keep doing this without you. Hey, Will, you excited for that new Flash movie that's coming out?
Only if it has my favorite actor, Ezra Miller, in it.
they are great in Justice League, Breaking the Speed Force. I mean, it won the best moment at the Oscars.
Apparently, it's the greatest moment in film history.
All right, let's see if there's any updates on the old interweb. Oh no, what is Ezra Miller doing now?
So I think, like, is this unprecedented? I don't think I've ever seen something like this where the star of a $200 million movie that's coming out next
Probably
year,
more than $200 million, like
just a massive, massive movie, is on a crime spree right now.
That's right. And no one can stop them.
They're just in Hawaii right now, apparently having abducted children
That's right.
and causing fights and threatening to kill people. And
this kind of stuff usually wouldn't interest me, like tabloid stuff, but the fact that it's attached to a movie I don't really care about that much.
well, it's like it's sad, it's not funny, it's horrible that this person is having this horrible breakdown.
But what is funny are the executives sitting in Warner Brothers going, holy shit, what are we gonna do?
I mean, it is wild that this movie that they are bringing back Michael Keaton as Batman
that
for,
is supposed to reboot the whole DC universe of movies.
This is the fulcrum on which the next 10 years of a franchise. Yeah, it's built around this person who is on a crime spree right now. So what are they going to do?
I have no idea.
Because they can't just, this isn't a case where they can just
like it's Christopher Plummer is replacing Kevin Spacey in a few scenes.
but it's not like that, because this is
the film is the character's name.
it's called The Flash.
Yes.
They can't just, because if they do it all over again, that adds $100 million to the budget.
But at a certain point, they probably will just have to buckle down, and that's what they'll have to do, right?
I mean, I think, okay, here's my bold prediction. Criswell predicts. I think
And Criswell was never wrong.
I think they are going to change the title to Batman and the Flash. And they are going to cut Ezra
It'll be
Miller
like
down.
Batman, and then the Flash much smaller underneath.
They cut down Ezra Miller as much as they can. They call Keaton back in, do a bunch of reshoots, really reorient the thing around
It
Batman.
will make no sense, though, because
I know.
what the story is. It'll be the Flash goes into another dimension, meets Batman. There's supposed to be like Hawkwoman, I think, or a new Supergirl. So like all these characters are supposed to be centered around the Flash doing all this stuff. And there has been predictions that the Ezra Miller character would then like disappear. Someone new would replace them.
Oh, they're going to do an Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus
You
on
think
him.
maybe they'll do that? Like, my face is vibrating so much. You know, I didn't even think about that. Like, oh, I'm going through all these dimensions and I'm changing into different actors.
Yes, I think that's going to happen.
Oh, that's
Okay.
Okay. Warner Brothers, if that happens, you owe us a paycheck. We just sold it for
I
it.
want $10 million for that.
Do you remember when that Dr. Parnassus thing happened? And we are like, how are they going to finish this movie? Because he hadn't shot almost anything.
Right. So if people don't know what we're talking about, Heath Ledger died after he had shot 2/3 of the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus. And I just remember at the time, Terry Gilliam had that reputation of all of his projects were cursed and doomed. And this was another example of it. But then he hired 3 people to come in, and
Colin Farrell,
Johnny Depp. And who's
Jude
the other
Law?
guy? Jude Law.
Okay.
And they all played versions of him in
And it makes sense within the
dream
context of the movie. Bad movie, though.
Bad movie, yeah. Terry Gilliam, good God.
Oh, boy.
Again, I think, this is what's going to be. The Flash is going to turn into another Flash halfway through. Because look, they're already changing Batman from one Batman to another.
It makes sense. You can go to different dimensions, like vibrating frequencies and stuff like that.
Maybe they can figure out a way that it would only add $30 million to the budget.
I mean, we don't care. This money means nothing.
I don't care.
Yeah.
I think this movie is just going to be shit. So
No matter what. You don't think the director of It and It Part 2, the 2-hour and 45-minute movie, is going to bring it to the Flash?
I say what they should do is just take all the footage and put it at the bottom of the ocean. But since they're
It'd be
not,
like The Day the Clown Cried.
since they're not going to do that, these are my friendly suggestions of how you salvage it.
So it'll be like Ezra Miller shows up. He's like, hey, I'm the Flash. And whoa, I've been hit by lightning. Turn into a different actor.
He's gone to his home planet.
We'll be there.